And you are live.
Okay, welcome everybody. This is House Education on Monday, March 24th, 2025. This is a virtual meeting of the committee during which no votes will be taken. We will not be doing that. That will only take place in the committee room when we're there. It's going to be basically discussion time for the committee, a little bit of reorienting, hopefully try to get some consensus on some areas. We're going to go from there. Just a reminder for everybody to raise their hand, make sure you're muted when you want to be muted, and all of the usual logistics that go along with Zoom. I just want to start off by maybe I'll open with a little bit of a statement, because I think we're beginning what's going to be what could be the hardest week we've ever had for a committee in the legislature. We've got a lot of work to do, and we've got a lot of hard decisions to make, and we got a pretty tight deadline. So I just want to take a few minutes to talk about where we find ourselves in our committee and the factors we're working with. You've heard me talk about why we are doing this work, the instability of the system, the need for districts to cut each year in order to be successful. But also want to talk about the work that's in front of us this week, the rest of the session, and perhaps coming up in 2026. So H454 came to us in late February, no fault of anybody in this committee, giving us, we're just one committee with many new members, precious little time and a great sense of urgency. You've heard me say publicly that the bill is long on concepts and a little bit short on details. But what do I mean by that? Governor Scott's proposal has, for example, the concept of 5 districts, but no detail as to how boards are elected, how representation will be distributed, how those elections will be run. Secretary Saunders has pointed out time and time again, there are sort of areas of Vermont that don't fit into the broad concepts of the proposal, like parts of the Northeast Kingdom that have no public schools, or districts that rely on public schools in other states. Yet we don't really have any proposed language to accommodate those needs. These are on us to do. The proposal sees a future state of larger elementary, middle, and secondary schools, something many of us embrace. Yet there's no proposal for funding the school construction to turn that concept into reality. Again, just more blanks that we're needing to fill in. So I just, want to point out that filling these gaps are going to require many, many hard decisions, detailed decisions that are going to be on us. So where does that leave us? We are going to move the ball as far down the field as we can and as best we can. We all feel the urgency of addressing our system so that it is financially stable and student-focused. And we are going to make progress in this session and set ourselves up to make even more progress next year with an important assist from the commission and others. So let's continue to dive in. Let's continue to respect each other and be fully aware of the enormity of making the kind of change that we broadly appear to agree on. Sound good? All right, let's get an update from Beth as to kind of our class size language. And I guess would point us particularly to sort of the what happens if you can't make it language, and what that means, and what it sort of would look like in real life.
Sure. Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. Can you all hear me okay? Great.
Yes.
I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can make it a little bigger. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So this is an amendment to section 16 VSA 165, which is the Education Quality Standards statute. That amongst all of the other things that the statute requires, oh, I'm getting a message that my internet connection is unstable. Can you all still see me?
Yes.
Okay. Along with all of the other things in EQS that the statute requires, you're adding class size minimum. So the school complies with average class size minimum subject to exemptions provided in state board rule. And then the class size minimum bands. But then I heard the chair ask, what do we have for what happens if you don't meet those minimums? So there's waiver language right now. Again, I'm sure it could use some work. And then what it says is if the secretary determines that a school is not meeting class size minimum standards over the course of 2 consecutive years, the secretary shall recommend to the state board one or more of the actions listed in subsection B of this section, regardless of whether the school is meeting all the other education quality standards, and then the state board follows the procedures in subsection C. So what do B and C say? B is current law. And so this is the process if a school is deemed to not be following any of the educational quality standards. If the secretary determines, I'm on line 7 there, if the secretary determines that a school is not meeting education quality standards or that it's making insufficient progress in improving student performance, then the secretary has to describe in writing actions that a district could take to meet either or both sets of standards and provide technical assistance to help the school get there. And if the school fails to meet those standards within 2 years following that determination, the secretary recommends to the state board one or more of these actions. So technical assistance for one more cycle of review, and that cycle of review is 2 years. Supervisory union boundary adjustment, that the secretary assume administrative control, the state board closes a school, or the state board require districts to consolidate. And then subsection C has the due process requirements here where the state board has to offer the school board an opportunity for a hearing. And then they'll either dismiss the secretary's recommendation or order that one or more of those actions is taken. And the action ordered by the state board has to be the least intrusive, consistent with the need to provide students attending the school substantially educational opportunities. And then if the school board doesn't like the action of the state board, they could appeal to Superior Court. So if a school were not meeting class size minimums over the course of 2 consecutive school years, then B would kick in. The secretary would tell the school how they would have to make it work and provide technical assistance. And then within 2 years of that, of 2 years of the notification of the secretary and the written notification of how they could meet that standard, the school size or class size minimum standard, then the secretary would be recommending to the state board that the state board take action. Then the state board would have to hold a hearing, and then the state board would make an order. So it's a course of several years before a school or a school district would actually get some sort of order from the state board to do something, or, you know, there's one of those consequences if it wasn't meeting the class size minimums.
Beth, does that allow the secretary to essentially waive, or the state board to just sort of say, well, it's clear that you are Canaan, you have no other schools anywhere near you, you have no ability to meet the class size minimum. So
yes, we have. Sorry, go ahead.
We let it go. Yeah.
We haven't talked about this in a while. I developed this language a while ago, and I don't know if we ever watched through it or if it's been a while, but we do have waiver language here. So if a school board determines that it operates a school that is unable to comply with the class size minimums due to geographic isolation, and again, this is all policy, you could put whatever other, concepts in there you wanted, then the school board may ask the State Board of Education to grant it a waiver from this subdivision. And then it requires the state board to define what qualifies as geographic isolation. So yes, there's the waiver requirement that's separate from the, you're not meeting education quality standards in the review that the secretary is doing over every school to make sure that they are meeting class size or to make sure that they are meeting EQS in general. So it could either be through the waiver process that a school is told, look, we get it, you're fine, or it could be through this. I don't really know what to call this process, this review process. Because it could be that the secretary determines in, analyzing why is the school not meeting class size minimums, maybe the secretary's recommendation to the board is that they get a waiver, or that this be, a contemplated rule update, or, we're just going to continue to provide them technical assistance for a couple more cycles. So I think there's multiple options in there other than a hard and fast, you're not meeting them, therefore we're going to close you down.
Yeah, and even without sort of the waiver language, it's a multi-year process anyway, at which point some of this could become moot as new districts are created with their own policies and sort of accountability rules and regulations.
Potentially. And you may want to think about, again, this is all policy. What we have in here right now, and again, we can change this, but what we have right now is that the secretary is making a determination if a school is not meeting class size minimums over the course of 2 consecutive years. You may want to think about whether it's average class size on a yearly basis or, a 2-year average daily membership. What is the time frame that you're looking at that? And are you going to, if you've got a smaller school and 1 year isn't going to meet the class size minimums, but next year they're going to be way over the class size minimums, do you want that reality to always be subject to a waiver or always be subject to review by the secretary, or do you want to build in that flexibility right off the bat?
I borrow your key.
I don't have it.
Whoop, somebody needs
Are
to
you opening?
mute. Thank you. Leanne, go ahead.
One of my questions is in that same language we were just looking at, it says that the secretary shall take over administrative. Sorry, are you not screen sharing anymore? I can't see the language anymore.
Oh, it's up. I'm screen sharing. Can you not see it anymore? What do you see?
No, I don't see it anymore. I'm not sure why.
Okay, I'll stop and then I'll start again.
Oh, there it is.
No,
There it
it's
is.
there. It's there.
Okay.
Okay.
So the secretary assume administrative control of an individual school, blah, blah, including budgetary control. But that doesn't say limited to budgetary control, and administrative control of a school means sort of some specific things. Does that mean that, like, is there any way that could be interpreted that the secretary would then be making all like principal decisions for the school while it's under investigation? Or
Yes.
okay, that seems drastic to me to have the Secretary of Education who's not working at a school suddenly have complete control while they're trying to figure out their next steps, including, like, you could say discipline control and rules and teacher oversight.
Leanne, that is existing law and language today, and it's like really only ever even contemplated in pretty significant circumstances. Let's say the school board quits, the superintendent resigns, and and there's no moving forward without somebody being in control.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a very rarely even contemplated thing, and it's not just about class size minimums. It's obviously about any sort of area of control that the state board has.
So there's no potential for it to be abused in like a hostile government takeover or anything.
Well, I can't talk about a hostile government takeover.
I'm not saying our government would do that, but
yeah, it is highly, highly unlikely.
Okay.
Yeah. Emily?
Sorry.
Thank you. So a couple of things. I did want to, when I wasn't there on Friday, the actual numbers changed on average class size minimum. So, but I can hold that to when we get to that conversation if you want. But I also want to talk about waivers. So you tell me what you want to hear.
Do waivers first.
Okay, that's perfectly fine. So I know everyone's heard me say this already before, but I'm going to repeat it again. There are districts in the state, and I'm, living in an area which I would suspect we have quite a number of them, who will find in our current structure that we are unable to meet the class size minimums, and the only option would be to merge a few schools, because we are very rural in my area. And I suspect this will happen around the state. And the only way to merge schools, students into, say, take yourself down from 3 or 4 schools down to 2 or 1 schools, would be to add on to that's a school or schools, to meet that. So I really deeply think there needs to be a waiver for any requirement for schools, for districts to take on construction bonding, the burden of school construction in order to meet class size minimums. Because right now, there's 2 reasons for this. Right now, of course, we all know we don't have a school construction aid program, but even with that, it's an undue burden on taxpayers to ask of them right now. So the other concern I have is that with the timeline of this, given what I just said, it is possible that in a year from now, we will be having a conversation that's very different when we have different lines, district boundaries. So in those district boundaries, it may change what schools could merge. And so I wouldn't even want a school to attempt any school construction aid until we know what any school construction to meet the class size minimums in order, because down the road, they might not need to do it. There might be another school they could merge with that they can't merge with right now until we know our new district boundaries. So I really feel very strongly that we need to find some path forward for those situations. I'm glad the geographic isolation language is in here, but that doesn't quite get to all of it, I don't think. So
Yeah.
that's just my
Thanks,
thought.
thanks, Emily. Good comments. There is the sort of reality, which is that it doesn't require, if you were to say, if we did this on a rolling 2-year average in terms of class size minimums, and then it would be a 2-year accountability process to not, first of all, you have to not meet the standard, and then you have kind of this process to work with the secretary, which could be as long as 2 years. The timeline, probably we would probably be in new districts and new rules anyway. That being said, I think that maybe some language that says no schools should be forced to merge, where if it involves significant school construction aid and no state program is available, I think that's fine. I'm not sure it would come up in that amount of time anyway, but I don't have any problem with some sort of safeguard.
If I can just follow
Yeah,
up on it, do you
Yeah.
mind? Because I
Yeah.
see case. Okay. Well, yes, I thank you. Appreciate that. I do think that it's important that we're letting our districts and our taxpayers know that we're not going to make decisions before, and on top of making decisions, also burdening taxpayers with what may potentially be construction projects, even if they're minor, on a school that may not be the one that you're going to end up using. I'm feeling really concerned about that. Even small moves don't make sense until we know what our district boundaries are going to be. So I really, that's the reason why I'm putting, this forward.
All right, so maybe Beth, you could work on something that says, that, kind of until new districts are operational, no required merging by the secretary or the state board, that something about requiring construction can take place, something along those lines. I think we will have, because it's a 2-year process, we'll probably have the districts all set up anyway before that would ever be required, but I'm happy to build in a safeguard.
Sure.
Yeah, great, thanks. Casey, go ahead.
Peter, and I think I'm just going to be a broken record and say this is a reason why I think I'm just going to put the plug in this. I think that's why we need to draw district lines instead of putting it to a subcommittee.
Yep, I hear you.
And I agree with that as well.
All right, any other questions or comments on this part? So Beth, will send you back just to work on some language along those lines would be great. All right, now, how about where else we need to sort of do this part of things? Otherwise, I might have us just skip ahead to the language on the commission restructuring. Aaron, I'm not sure if you're available to talk yet. If I left anything, go ahead, Emily.
I'm so sorry, but I did want to just ask, if we're moving away from class size minimums.
Yeah, go ahead. No,
I just wanted to ask about the, everyone knows that I was pretty strongly in favor of the 3 that were there, the 12, the 15, the 18. And that's where because I had to miss the afternoon. I just want to make a statement about saying that, I still think the 3 are better, regardless of what the numbers of the 3 are better. And I just wanted to put a plug in here for what I had understood, and maybe you heard different testimony, but what I had understood was the future of middle school sounded like it was going to be 6 through 8, and that's the direction we are trending. So that's one of the reasons why I supported the VSBA supported model, 12, 15, and 18. So just wanted to put that plug in there because I wasn't able to share my voice on Friday on that.
Thank you, Emily. I think that what you see in front of you is what was worked out as sort of compromise language. Beth, go ahead. And then I remember where we're going
since
next.
Emily wasn't there, part of it, some of the little bits of shift was because multi-age classrooms, they could have 2 grades in them. So we kind of grouped them in groups of 4 because you might have a 5-6, you might have a 3-4. When there was an odd number of classes in the group, it seemed to make it a little more difficult if you needed to do multi-age classrooms than if you had an even number. It was part of the slight shift that happened there with the groupings. Also, 6th graders being kind of a different kettle of fish than a high schooler. So having 4 groups instead of 3 groups was part of the conversation.
Chris, do you want to add anything to that? You were sort of the one who that pretty much square with what you had looked back at testimony as we're doing.
Yeah,
this.
I looked back at testimony from every time I can't say her last name, Bordenaro.
And Bordenaro, yeah, Bordenaro.
Bordenaro,
yes.
where she had given us testimony that had an outline of multiple different studies that had been done on this, and I was looking through and kind of taking an average of what those studies had come up with for small and larger size classrooms. So I took information that was presented to us in testimony and came up with what I believe is a pretty decent medium ground for us to try to move forward with.
Thanks. So I forgot that I did send everybody away on Friday with homework. And that was to see if your districts had a class size policy and how they are used, how they address the issue of specials or electives or whatever you want to call them in high school. So I would ask if anybody's got anything to report on that.
This is Kate. I did my homework and I sent that information to Annie to share out.
Right. Casey, you look like you unmuted. You're going to tell us all about
Yeah.
Maple Run.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it on Friday, but I'll just reiterate now. They do class size maximums, and they don't do the minimums. That's for, I believe that's for all K through 12 in the district.
Beth?
Not surprising, I did not find any class minimum policies up here in the kingdom. I looked at Danville, Lake Region, etc. The class size maximums that are part of the current policies, which aren't really used. If 6 kids move in, you just go over your maximum.
Go ahead, Leanne.
So I got the OSSU district policy from my principal. And first of all, it's not being utilized. Okay. So the policy I'm reading to you is not actually, he had to dig for it. And I can tell you from personal experience, this has no relationship with how many kids we have in our class. But it, basically says nothing about actual numbers. Oh no, here it is. Comply with state or federal requirements, blah, blah, blah. K through 3, when taken together, shall average fewer than 20 students per teacher. In grades 4 through 12, when taken together, classes shall average fewer than 25 students per teacher. The total class roll of a teacher shall not exceed 100 students. So I guess it's more all about maximums. It doesn't really say anything about minimums. It just says class size guidelines will be used to inform annual decisions related to staffing and program offerings.
Yeah. I'll just offer that in my district, it has optimal class size sort of recommendations used very much in the same way. Not minimums, just optimals and maximums.
Yeah.
Josh?
Yeah, I sent it along yesterday and shared some paper not yesterday, Friday, and shared some paper copies. K through, so we do minimums. K3, we are 13, 4 to 5 is 13, and then 6 through 12 is 14 as our minimums. We also put an optimal range in for the administrators to use. K3 is 13 to 18, 4, 5, 13 to 20, 6, 8, 14 to 22. And then depending on the type of class, so whether it's a PE or music or just a general ed class, the ranges are 14 to 22 and 14 to 25. So that's how we do it. And currently we are above the minimum within the optimum range for most of our classes. We start to run into some capacity to have that many kids in the class when we get to some of our AP and a couple electives.
Kate?
So WCUUSD, that's Washington Central model class size chart, K to 3, 13, 4 to 6, 15, 7 to 12, 17.
Those are models, not minimums?
Those are model minimums.
Okay. And does it make, and again, these are just, I assume not enforced, but are more guidelines. And it does, and it's silent, I assume, on electives, that sort of thing, AP classes.
Correct.
Okay. Rob?
Yeah. Interesting because just today I was reading Taconic and Green's new policy, and they're looking to do some serious consolidation down here before even anything, before we take any action, which would mean closing a couple elementary schools, perhaps coming up with a regional middle school. And I was actually interested in that article because it did say that they were talking about class size minimums for middle school at 20. Yeah, and more along the lines of what Kate said for the younger kids too, 13, 15, that sort of thing.
Okay, no one's solving the problem that we have on the table before us. Leanne, are you still, you got your hand up? Yeah, go ahead.
I realized my principal sent me a second document, which actually does have minimums. In K through 3, the minimum is 12 to 15, and in 4 through 8, it's 15. But then it goes on to have complete, instructional areas, specific instructional areas. So in PE, it's 20, in music, it's 18, and in general classes, it's 18. And I don't know what this means, but it says singleton classes, it's 14. So maybe that means like IBLs, but that doesn't make sense to have a 14-person IBLs. No, it doesn't mean that.
I think a singleton is just like, maybe it's like math about trees or something like that. It's like incongruent, like it doesn't have any, there's no other section of it. Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, those are the minimums by department in high school. But again, these are not being used.
All right, so again, what we're trying to do is language to deal with those high school classes that might still operate with less than the minimums that we're putting in because they're highly specialized. Chris?
Yeah, I can, ours has some pretty specific language. Let me just pull it up really quick here. Well, it can go straight to high school, and it talks about the minimum is 16, optimum is 20, and maximum is 25. Then it has for electives, the minimum would be 12 unless there are equipment slash lab restrictions. Optimum would be 20 again if unless there's equipment and lab restrictions, and then the maximum would be 25 again with the same caveats of lab and equipment. And then the PE, the band, and the chorus are the maximum of 35.
Kate, you have a hand up still. I don't know if it's old or new. We'll consider it old at this point. Those of you who are a little closer to the ground in education, what's the term used for these types of classes that we're trying to basically say you don't need to follow the minimums? Do we call them electives, singletons, extras?
I think electives is appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Anybody?
And I think, sorry,
Go ahead.
because actually any advanced course like advanced placement is considered an elective. So that would work.
Okay. So if we were to say school districts may create their own policies or on electives, what do people want to do with this? Just so we can, who's got some thoughts? Rob?
Well, for one, I thought that whatever Erin was reading on Friday, whoever's policy that was, in other words, taking into consideration the core, the average of all the core classes put together needs to equal whatever we decided, 18 or 20, but that exceptions would be made for electives or remedial, that sort of thing, something like that. I thought that whatever she read was pretty good.
It was fairly specific as I recollect the Montpelier
Yes.
one. So I would just say, so if we can kind of use something along the lines of high schools may develop their own minimums for non-core or elective classes. We could even throw in some examples. But we could also put in, but maybe this is better left at the local level, classes shall not operate with fewer than 5 kids, something like that. I'm a little hesitant to do that, but anyway, go ahead, Erin.
I can go back to the Montpelier language, and I think I've sent it to Beth. So the specifics to what Rob was just saying is in their policy, it says because the minimum and maximum averages apply to content areas, an individual class may be smaller than the minimum average or larger than the maximum average. So that would be I'm a little worried about us getting into core and electives because I think we're too far in the weeds and schools are going to define it differently and we're going to do grad standards. So that I think, if I'm understanding, would mean whether that's your English 9 or your AP British Lit, they're all within English. So your averages across English have to hit that minimum. You might have bigger some places, smaller some places. I want to be careful. I'd like to understand this to make sure we aren't killing electives, but also I think there's some places, probably in larger schools, that are at scale where maybe there has to be a bit more hard choices around some electives. That's some of the, everybody's feeling pain in all of this. That's some of, may impact places I have been or my kids have been where, it might mean, I don't think we want to reduce opportunities by some gross amount, but it might mean, okay, you're going to have a little bit fewer options in one area in order to meet this overall as a school.
Would you read it again, please, Aaron?
Because the minimum and maximum averages apply to content areas. An individual class may be smaller than the minimum average or larger than the maximum average. And then furthermore, it says flat out exempt, this is Montpelier, from class size minimums are CTE, special education, academic support, we could call it that, or MTSS, Act 173, flexible pathways, which I believe hopefully would pull in our early college problem, services provided to ELL, and driver's ed.
That would be an important sentence.
Do people feel comfortable at least having Beth take some of that language, only have it refer to minimums because we aren't getting into maximums or averages?
Yes.
And then we can have her put it together and then revisit it in a more complete package. Leanne, go ahead.
Well, Erin kind of touched on this at the end of her statement, but one of the reasons I think that it is important to protect electives is because maybe it's different at other schools than, or sorry, I didn't mean Beth, I meant Erin. Maybe it's different at other schools than mine, but our electives are really junior, senior heavy. And I feel like the kids who take advantage of flexible pathways are more the ones that we're competing with the tech centers for, not early college. I think that if we're going to try and combat early college or compete with early college, the loss of electives is really what would undo us. That's one of the reasons kids are going to early college, is because there's not enough interesting offerings at the junior senior level. At least that's been my experience.
Very good point. Beth, go ahead.
Are you all considering putting the language? I have the document that Erin was reading from, Rep Brady was reading from, pulled up in front of me. Are you contemplating this lives in the statute or direction to the state board for rulemaking?
I would assume to be consistent, it would have to be treated just like all of the, it would go with all of the class size minimums. So in statute and rulemaking.
I will connect. I will connect with the right people and get you something.
Okay. All right. Everybody comfortable with that as a plan? We didn't just agree to anything other than to have Beth present us some language. Okay. All right. Other things within the class size minimum discussion to take up. We can come back to it. I just say, and while we're on Zoom, feel free to use everybody's first names. Fairly informal. Okay. Maybe we'll have Beth show us where we are on the school district boundary subcommittee language. Have us walk through that.
You guys see that okay?
If you could blow it up just a little bit more,
Yep.
that'd be great.
Do you want to just jump? So we'll jump into the first substantive piece, and that's the non-voting members. I haven't made any changes here.
Okay, yeah, then you don't need to read through it.
Okay.
Aaron, go ahead.
Are we jumping from the class size section entirely and leaving that aside?
Yeah, I personally didn't have much more to say about it, but I'm happy to go back to it. And so the intention was not to leave it if people still had more to talk about with it.
I guess when I made notes on Friday of the things that were left for us, not including what Emily has said about not being there for the numbers discussion, the remaining pieces related to class size, we just went through the sort of enforcement, kind of bureaucracy piece of it. We just went through exceptions and are moving forward. But also, Leanne, I think, raised an important point that I would agree with, which is what schools does this apply to? And do the class size minimums apply to independent schools receiving students on public tuition dollars? Because if we're setting up two very different systems and even almost like perverse incentives, that could be a step backwards in this moment towards efficiency and scale. So that is another piece. I know it's going to be a sticky wicket that I think falls under class sizes that we have to deal with, and I'll put that on the table.
Leanne, would you want to just kind of restate what you had said on Friday?
Sure. And I think that it's not just efficiency and scale. I think it is also public education and economic justice. But what I said was that it is really hard for me to support a class size minimum that I know could potentially trigger this 5-year reconsideration process for a school like well, I don't want to name any schools right now, but some very small schools, and then tell them we're no longer going to fund you. Like say it's the end of this reconsideration process, you're done there, that's the solution, but then send money for their kids to go to a school that doesn't have to meet that class size minimum, that's a private school. I think that presents quite a few problems. One being the scale and efficiency that Aaron brings up, and another that's like completely unfair to say like you have to meet these standards to stay open, but if you don't, we're just going to let a private school have our public money and they don't have to meet those standards. Does that make any sense?
Yes. Yeah. I just wanted you to restate. I think it's actually very clear. Does anybody have any questions for Leanne about what she means by that? Go ahead, Jana.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I definitely agree that we're encountering a fairness issue. So as we discuss this, does it make sense for us to consider whether, the rules would apply equally to, independent schools approved for public tuition in terms of, running them through the same process that we just walked through with Beth?
Why don't we take a moment and hear from Beth about sort of the dual accountability systems that currently exist and where this might fit if we were to do class size minimums also applying to independent schools that take public dollars.
So current law is that, and I'm sorry, I may have to turn off my camera. Current law is education quality standards do not apply to approved independent schools unless they voluntarily elect to go through that process. I believe there may be one that is either an approved independent school that meets education quality standards or is in the process of becoming an approved independent school that meets education quality standards. So for the purposes of this conversation, I don't really believe there's any more than maybe one school that already the law that we just looked at in section 165 would apply to. So you have multiple different options. You could just create brand new law that applies to just approved independent schools. Or you could require, certain parts of education quality standards to apply to all approved independent schools, just approved independent schools that are eligible to receive public tuition, And then you could require the State Board of Education to incorporate those requirements into their 2200 series rules, which are the rules, the approved independent school approval program rules. And you could, those are kind of the places where things would live. You could, because education quality standards don't already automatically apply to approved independent schools, you could choose to have all of education quality standards apply to all, to apply to a subset of them. You could pick and choose which pieces of education quality standards. It sounds like for this conversation, we're talking about class sizes. You could choose to have just class sizes applicable to whatever many approved independent schools you want. And then part of that process, I believe, would be asking the state board to update their 2200 series. Is that what you were looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. Jana, was that right?
Yeah, I think, as we talk all of that through, that there's a lot of policy choices wrapped up in that, but I guess as a starting point, for us to talk about the idea of these class size minimums applying to independent schools that receive public tuition, and potentially asking the state board to incorporate that into the 2200 rule series, I guess would be a suggestion.
To my mind, that's probably the cleanest way to do it, because that's really where the dual rules live, as opposed to sort of having parts of EQS apply. That might sort of get a little more confusing. Josh, go ahead.
I don't remember the exact verbiage, but I believe that exact scenario was hashed out in H454. And maybe Beth knows better where in that bill the verbiage was, but I think if we're sitting here talking about this and it's already been flushed out, I believe. So why wouldn't we try to use that information or that verbiage in this place, right? I think.
Sure. Let's take a look and see what Beth has to say about that. I would just within 454, it sort of falls, I think, under well, they use, I think, ratios, or 454 uses ratios.
Right, but it still holds.
And it applies to everybody.
Correct. So, I mean, that's what we're getting at here. So to make it sound like it doesn't, we haven't made the decision to do that, but it is in that document that we haven't really looked at.
Yeah. Casey, go ahead, and then we'll have Beth kind of walk through some of that.
And I might be wrong. Section 6 deals with the independent schools, which starts on page 23 of 454 as introduced. Unless that's not the version that was on there today. That's what I have. It has a whole bunch of stuff about independent schools, and I think that would apply here, but I may be wrong, so I'll defer to Beth.
Me too.
So I'm going to share my screen. Can you see this? It should be H454. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, page 30.
So here's the section again. Rep 2 was correct. What H454 does is it takes the section on a independent school, section 166, and it gets rid of the approved independent school concept. It keeps the recognized independent school concept, and it adds the concept of school choice school. And so then if we go down to page 30, here are all the requirements for an independent school to be designated a school choice school, which for all intents and purposes means it would be eligible to receive public funds. Standardized assessments, that's already in current law. Implementation of minimum state graduation requirements, that would be new for independent schools. It would also be new for state schools because we don't have statewide graduation requirements. The provision of special education services to all enrolled students to the same extent as would be required of a public school operated by a school district. I'm not quite sure what this is trying to get at, but currently approved independent schools that want to be eligible to receive public tuition have to agree to enroll any student placed there on an IEP. And then there are provisions for how they can meet those child's needs. An audit by a certified public accountant, a maintenance of minimum financial reserves. And then here's what I think we were getting at is compliance with the school choice school requirements of the education quality standards. This is saying that compliance with education quality standards would be defined by the secretary through rulemaking, and they would be different, potentially different requirements for school choice schools than for public schools. Because, and the reason I'm saying that is because this is specific, this language here is specific to compliance with school choice requirements of education quality standards. And we don't know, these rules have not been created yet, so we don't know what those standards are.
Great. So to sort of sum up, there is language that says that the standards might or might not be the same for a regular public school, and in this case, an independent school serving as a school choice school, or even just a school choice school as said there. Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
So with that, right, we could very easily take this whole section 6, and if there is a want to specify that out a little bit more, I mean, here is the verbiage. We could just change a couple words and use this section right here, or use it as whole cloth and go with it. But I mean, I don't think we need to.
But I would say, Josh, that
anything.
My response would be that what we just read has it's carrying around a lot of baggage. Most notably, that school choice schools would be under new rules, and that rulemaking would be done by the agency. Right now, rulemaking is done by the State Board of Education, and there are rules governing independent schools. So it's a little more complicated than just being able to plop the language in, unless our intent is to say, yes, the same rules apply.
Well, right. But what I'm saying is in that, I mean, you could, I'm not saying I agree or disagree. I'm just trying to work through the conversation. But I mean, you could literally say, instead of the secretary, you could say the Board of Education. You could say, I mean, what I'm trying to get to is we have all the verbiage here. If it takes the change of a couple words, then you could do it right here using most of the verbiage from the governor's proposal, from this bill, right? And I mean, not that I don't necessarily think we need to change it, but I'm trying to show that there's a vehicle here right now to make this decision and put it forth.
Janet, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think I have an answer necessarily to whether I haven't quite gotten to a place where I could figure out how we could potentially adjust 6 to sort of make it fit with our discussion, just because I think in line with what Peter was just saying, I think, you know, how we would apply EQS, which is sort of complex to this current situation around independent schools receiving public tuition could involve a lot of discussion. But I wonder if this is the moment where we could talk about whether there's anything else that's part of that list that we might want to consider for kind of an addition to the bill that we're working on. Like if we keep walking through the rest of it to understand what is current law and what would be a new proposal under the administration's bill language. If you want to talk about that now.
I might try to keep us to class size minimum specifically. You know, we are, in a sense, kind of creating, using current law to deal with the current status of things. While new districts, you know, one of the if the scenario unfolds like this, that the District Boundary Commission draws district boundaries, presents them to us. We then have to take them, figure out all the election stuff, although maybe we would toss that over to government ops and we're going to learn about all that's involved there. But we probably would need to come up with charter language for each of these new districts. Beth has said that the least complicated way to sort of operationalize these new districts is going to be to give them charters. So we have an in-between period where we're really trying to get, class size minimums as a tool, and given that sort of multi-year accountability, what we're really doing is signaling very loudly what the state policy is. So as we move to, create bigger, larger districts, they're going to be governed in a bit of a different way as we create charters for them. And, that's really when we sort of get into the issue of some of the sort of the broader policy goals within each district, or sort of the broader operational, we can actually have operational differences between districts within that charter as we see fit. But because these are all going to be all new municipalities, they need to be chartered, just like we do with towns or villages or cities. Which is to say, before that happens, we still want to signal what we expect from our educational ecosystem, to use the secretary's term. And, I think we're signaling loudly that we believe that, we need to use class size minimums in order to really have appropriate, educationally appropriate class sizes. Erin?
I'm not sure if I'm following completely, so feel free to steer me back on course. But I think what Jana was talking about was taking, as Josh and Casey have mentioned, some of the language and the constructs in the governor's bill, and applying those that could fit to our current state, which is what we're doing with class size minimums, make those applicable now within the larger bucket of scale. How do we maximize our dollars? How do we put more bodies under fewer roofs? How do we do the sort of hard things we know we need to do to make our system more stable and efficient? At the same time that we know the broader concept of school choice schools, or a different paradigm, is really one that falls under our work as a legislature next year when we are chartering new districts. What is their what are their roles? How are they delivering education, et cetera? So I bring that up because I wonder if some of the definitions or the narrowing of tuition dollars proposed in 454 could be sort of a congruent definition here, that we would in the current state use a few more limitations on our public tuition dollars, particularly leaving the state, leaving the country, and this sort of concept of a 51% threshold. So places where they are essentially providing a lot of our public education.
Yeah,
use it as tuition limits, and in some place in here, tuition limits, and then apply that as the filter for when class size minimums would apply.
Yeah, and I was really thinking more along the lines of how do you have accountability for that before we sort of move into the future state immediately. And we sort of have the Rule 2200 series and the state board that does those, which to me, sort of while we're waiting for the future state of doing things, is the process that we would continue to use. All right, so given that, Aaron, if you've got some suggestions following up on Josh and Casey's desire to sort of look at some of this language and how it can apply, do you want to continue, you or Jana continue that thread?
I'll just say that I think Aaron did state with more clarity where I was sort of attempting to go with that. So appreciate that. I think I was saying that all in a very vague way.
Aaron, maybe you can.
Perhaps we want to have Beth pull up the language and we can look at it specifically, or,
Sure,
oh,
sure.
sorry,
Yeah,
Chris has his hand.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that as we're looking through this, we're not just looking through this for all the restrictions that we can apply on independent schools without thinking about the overall concept of this section and why it was put in there in the first place, because there was going to be an option to have more school choice using independent schools with this option. So I don't really want to sit here and pick all the restrictive stuff out and then not have that other thought process attached to it.
So that does steer us in a broader discussion that may steer us away from putting a little bit of a bow on class size minimums. I guess, if we're looking at broader, well, let me just put it this way. I would advocate for Beth to take the class size minimum rules if we want rules to be applied the same, and I'm of that camp because I worry that independent schools, and I'm not talking about the big boys, I'm talking about the little ones, can say, hey, look, we've got really small classes, come to our school, which puts our public schools at a real sort of competitive disadvantage. And what we're trying to do is stabilize them financially and keep the money within the public system. So we have a parallel process that exists in the Rule 2200 series without having to bring in all the baggage of EQS for the current state of things. And so let me ask Beth to bring us back tomorrow some language that sort of mimics what we're talking about for public schools, but using the 2200 series without getting all tied up in knots over EQS in the current state.
Got it.
Okay. Thank you very much. That being said, where do we want to take the discussion now? Do we want to talk about some of that language, but also sort of where it fits in? I'm just going to say my feelings, me personally. I'm not trying to pull us in any direction, except we all try to pull each other in different directions. I think the sort of school choice school concept probably needs a little bit more thought. Here's the way I see things sort of unfolding, is that as we sort of get from current state to new and bigger districts, and we come to chartering them, that becomes an area where we look at historic, that's an area where you can look at the Northeast Kingdom and say, you got Canaan up in the corner, and then below it, a whole swath of area where there are no schools. And you can start making exceptions or sort of reflect the real reality within those charters. The whole school choice school concept is going to be hard to apply everywhere. I think that there is zero, if we were to sort of create new boundaries, new charters, new districts, within current law, there is zero restriction on any district, even right now, from creating magnet type schools. In fact, Burlington already has them. So right now there's no restriction on a district going in that direction. I don't think. Beth could correct me if I'm wrong or provide some clarity. And I don't think that we're necessarily talking about sort of changing that ability. She can correct me when I'm wrong tomorrow.
Were you looking for me to weigh in?
Yeah, so I just like what is the current state today of a district being able to create either a theme school or provide something that sort of in that arena that you could have a school choice school sort of set up with today?
in the public school system.
Yeah.
So my understanding, as long as a school is meeting education quality standards and all other applicable laws related to public schools, that a school district could theoretically, if it had the resources and the input and the community support, could create a school that specializes in something. I do believe Burlington has two, I think they call them magnet schools. I think they're elementary schools. But there's nothing, as long as a public school is following all of the applicable state laws, and I'm not aware of anything in state law that makes carve outs for magnet schools in the way that H454 was proposing a whole new set of education quality standards for school choice schools, both public and independent schools. In our current construct, I'm not aware of any prohibition on creating a specialized program or school, but that school would still need to follow education quality standards, all of the applicable rules and other laws that apply to public schools.
Chris, go ahead.
I might have totally heard this wrong, but what I just heard is that pretty much any public school is a school choice school. So any student can go to any public school.
I think that what you heard was that any school district has the freedom to set up a school choice type school if they wanted to. Really, just the same way that right now any district has the freedom to have choice. They can close their high school and go to full choice under our current system.
And each school district has their own policy on intra-district school choice. So some school districts will assign you to an elementary school with some limited exceptions. Some school districts, it's different, there's more choice. And so intra-school district choice is going to vary from district to district. And then with that variance, a school district could theoretically come up with or open, operate, whatever, a program or a school that we would all consider colloquially a magnet school that specializes in some sort of programming, a theater school. And as long as that school was following education quality standards, then the policies of that school district would apply to that school as far as who could go there.
So then theoretically, if we are creating much larger districts where you've got multiple high schools in a region, there is nothing that would, under current rules, prohibit that school district board to create a themed high school, for example, that as long as it met EQS and all other applicable laws. Is that correct?
Yes.
So it's only on the district level that's preventing that anything like that from happening now.
Yes, I think that's fair to say. Well, I'm gonna let Beth answer that.
I think no matter what I say, someone's going to disagree with me. I would say that the laws are in place to allow choices to be made, but the reality on the ground may be that there's just not the buy-in or the taxing capacity or et cetera. But as far as whether there is any outright prohibition on it, no.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't want us to get too far afield from our previous discussion on class size minimums, and I think we're getting into a kind of a bigger, broader area, which we can do. Do people want a break? It's been an hour and 15 minutes. All right, let's take 10 minutes. Annie, shall we close this and then jump back on with a new Zoom?
You can do that. I will turn off live and you can all stay in Zoom or you can exit the Zoom.
So we can stay in this room and not have to re-sign on and then you just start up again with a new Zoom.
Yes.
Okay, so let's close out the Zoom. We'll all stay here. You can turn off your